Welcome to Cerulean Arts tour and talk for the current collective exhibition featuring the work of Maria DiMauro, Bruce Garrity, Kim Hoechst, Stephanie Rogers, and Jeff Thomsen. The show is up through April 9th, so hope you can see it. It's also available on our website, and I'll put a link in the chat. We are recording tonight's talk. So we'll put it on our YouTube channel after the fact, so you can watch it again or send it to someone who missed it. And if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat. So what we're going to do is walk through the gallery and visit each artist one by one. So I'm going to spotlight Tina's video. And the first artist we're going to visit is Kim Hoechst.
Okay.
Hello, Kim. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
To tell us a bit about yourself and your path and your work in this show.
Yes. Well, a bit about myself. I've been painting for over 15 years, and I built the foundation for my painting skills at PAFA. And I've continued to try to grow those skills by working with different master artists independently. And this is my fourth show now at Cerulean Arts Collective. I joined in 2018, and I would say I feel like with this show more than others, my work has really evolved into a different direction, hopefully a better direction, but I continued to paint representationally all these over the years, and I've always been very interested in exploring different genres. I love painting architecture, so you'll see a lot of architectural subjects in my work, and I love doing still life, and most of my landscapes usually have some architecture in them, but I do some straight up landscape as well, and cityscapes. So I'm continuing to do that kind of subject matter, but I think whereas in the past I was working with very bold colors and really trying to go high contrast to show, sunlight versus shadow, I've really tried to rein in my palette and my color key, and the work in these shows is more focused on, my primary emphasis is more about capturing the atmosphere and real conditions of light and space, and maybe taking a more subtle approach. So for me, it's been this emphasis on finding the right color key for the painting and holding the colors in that key very closely together, to try to get this greater sense of atmosphere. And it's interesting because I've never quite understood how to approach abstract painting, but I noticed that I'm also starting these paintings differently, and in this shift, I'm starting much more abstractly, and so the beginning of the paintings don't really look like a representational painting nearly as much as when I was doing maybe imprimatura and putting a lot of definition into the first pass. So what I've been doing is trying to get these big shapes and the color key right, and then as that starts to come into balance, then keep bringing in more information from there. So that's kind of what I would say about the work in this show. And the other thing that I think might be, again, a little different from the past, I've always painted from life when I was doing still lifes, but a lot of my architectural subject matter, I was choosing subjects away from my home where I couldn't necessarily paint from life. So I was doing sketches and photo references, and I've shifted a lot more to really preferring to paint from life and trying to find subject matter there. And it's not always possible. So like these two you're seeing now, those I couldn't set up and paint from life. So I was doing sketches and working from composite of photo references and just really my own imagination. But in general, as I go forward, I really am trying to shift that emphasis to working from life, because I really think that's giving me a better opportunity to react to my subject matter in a more way that perception can come across to the viewer.
And these are all oil, yes?
Everything is oils, yes, and love to work on linen and I've been experimenting with the Arches oil paper, and that's getting really interesting results for me. And then I put those onto panels. But yes, everything you're seeing is in oils.
So are there any art historical references or people that you think about or that inspire you?
I don't know if I would say it's historical. I think I've really
Or contemporary?
more contemporary. I really tapped into this. I can't honestly say I'm there, but I'm trying to move there. I'm very intrigued with this sort of school of perceptual painting, and I'm looking at a lot of those artists, and just finding that's always been, I've always admired those kind of paintings, but until I sort of had this recent round of evolving my work, I wasn't really maybe knowing what it was I was responding to. And now that I'm trying to do more of that myself, that painting that you just showed, for example, that's a still life that I just, in trying to work more in my home, I found like, oh, I've got this room on the front of my house that's in North Light, and this cool light comes in all day. So in the past, a lot of my still lifes, I would set them up and I would light them, and I'd make a controlled environment, but they would look more staged. And here I was exploring this idea of really just embracing how this cool light was coming in, and I was working with all these blues. And so it was very interesting because I've always had such I've used color so strongly, and in this I was like almost like afraid I wasn't having enough color, but I was trying to maintain the atmosphere of the painting. So I'm enjoying the new challenges and just the process of observation and perception. And then I think there's some of these too are getting into some of the landscape. I have spent many summers at the New Jersey shore, and I've only recently started painting that. That's the fishing pier at Ocean City, that large piece. This is a kind of a cloudscape out in Westchester near where I live. But as I just wanted to kind of paint different things in my surroundings, I found that a lot of times if I wanted to paint things at the shore and I was looking for less, typical beach scenes or whatever, that again, I kind of, if I could hang my hat on some architectural subject matter, I felt like I could find, something that excited me to paint. And so I painted the fishing pier, and then there's another painting next to that where I painted looking across the estuary going into Stone Harbor. So it's a lot of nature, but there's still that whole line of, that's the Stone Harbor houses back there. So, and it's kind of bringing those two things together.
So and you say it's a mixture of, are the landscapes like on the spot, or are they from photo reference, or both?
This kind of stuff is sketches and photo references. So as I evolve my painting more from life, I've done most of that inside. So we'll see what this summer brings. I'm not a big plein air painter. Most of my landscapes, if I do plein air paint, it's for, really experiencing the atmosphere and making sketches. And then I'll end up, really making the full paintings in the studio. The one that there in the corner, that piece is kind of interesting. It's not a kind of maybe typical subject matter. When I was painting the still life with the tea set up in that same room, I looked out and I saw these really interesting reflections in the window in the side of my house. And I thought it intrigued me because I thought it sort of connected painting the architecture with the still life, because it was that same very cool light, and everything in the foreground is in shadow, but you have the the bright image of the house across the way, and the reflection and the background. So again, it's just exploring kind of what for me is like less obvious, maybe in the past I would want to paint that window with sunlight pouring through it. So I was just looking, for a different take. And again, being Northern Light, it was something that I didn't have to deal with the sunlight moving in 15 minutes. It was really more about an experience of looking out that window, throughout the morning. So.
And your work has a presence of, it implies the presence of people, but they don't really show up in your work in like domestic scenes or windows or.
Yeah, in fact, in my previous show, I started to explore that a little bit, and I don't know. I think
No.
maybe my work, maybe it's just more contemplative for me. It's more about the space, and I'm like definitely looking for the like personal touches within it. But yeah, it's more about the space and the atmosphere. And I think bringing people into that, then that can be so interesting, but it just becomes it becomes a different thing.
Well, thank you, Kim.
Thank you very much.
And next we have Jeff Thomsen. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Mike. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks Tina and Mike for especially hanging my work in a way that seems to convert these individual pieces done at different times and places into a kind of art installation where there's, especially in the realm of color, where there's kind of a glow and a light emanating. So thank you for that. Thank you for putting my best foot forward,
Well,
whatever efforts
it's
I had
our
to go
pleasure.
backward. I've been painting for just over 30 years, though only full-time for the past, I guess, 8 years. Before that, I was, believe it or not, in the law world, and I'm happy to have escaped from that. And those 3 were watercolors, but I mostly paint in oil. And on full display here is the things that I do, which is either small landscapes done on site, and then worked on in the studio touched up in the studio, or larger narrative works, which involve people and animals usually, and invented landscapes. And in this case, if I'm sitting there painting something and people walk by, I'll jot them in. There were dog walkers going by that day.
So are these in the vicinity of your house?
Yes, that one especially. I go to local parks, particularly if they have bathrooms, and or I'll paint in friend's backyard or my backyard, Valley Forge Park.
So what is it about the plein air that attracts you?
Well, as you can sort of see, I kind of am fascinated by light and shadow, particularly the shadow. That's where I think all the real interest lies. And I come to the conclusion, it took me a while as a painter, that if you take care of the shadows, the lights will take care of themselves in a painting. But what I do like, and what I do see in the landscape is sort of a pulsing intensity, and which is why I like to paint in oil, because I can layer the paintings. This So whether a larger work like this, which involves like months of work and a lot of preliminary work before that in terms of sketches and compositional studies, color studies, I paint pretty much the same way in layers. So I start out outside in these small landscapes in layers and just build things up.
And it's a traditional technique, yes.
I suppose, certainly traditional with me.
Mhm.
Well, I guess it's in distinction to, those people who are like alla prima painters who like put on thick paint and sculpt form in that regard. I like to display the depths that I perceive or hallucinate over in the landscape, and as best I can. And the best way that I found to do that is by layering in oils.
So, and this one's a study, yes, for a larger piece in the show.
Yes, it is, but sometimes the studies are okay in their own regard, and so they're really sort of like different versions of the same painting rather than a study. So if I think I like it well enough, I'll slap a frame on it and try to hang it somewhere. And this was one that I did like well enough that I thought it was worth imposing on everybody here in this in this show.
So did you intend it as a study? Like
I did. When I do these things, it's if I do a small landscape like these, I've done them over many, many years, and so I kind of have a concept of where I'm going with it. But the larger works, I'm at sea. So how do you paint a bulldog? What colors should I use in this landscape that I'm creating? I do many studies in that regard to mostly to figure out what I shouldn't do. And then I say I'll never do that again until, of course, I do it again. This one is called Keeper. Prompt. And these narrative works, I'm not trying to impose a message of any kind. I'm just prompted by something that interests me visually. In this case, an episode I saw at the Duke Lemur Center, a favorite place of mine, down in North Carolina, where a young woman who worked at the center was carrying food and water for these lemurs who are going to the reward in the forest, but this turned into something else. I kind of think it's about climate change, this painting, but then again, it could be about whatever you want it to be. And this again is another one of the paintings done on site. And this is a theme I'm hoping to return to, I guess, is reminiscing about, good times on the ball field. There's a lot of ball fields nearby me. And then there's the great challenge of trying to paint metal fence.
And then you also work you've got like a one watercolor here, but then 3 on the outer wall.
Yeah, an ink wash drawing here. Yeah, I had a lot of knee issues this past couple of years, and so I went on a painting trip to Rhode Island, and so I brought with me something less intense and onerous than, my oils. A lot of people pack lightly when they go out to paint. I bring a steamer trunk with me.
So this is a very intriguing painting. Can you speak about this one?
Young Jaguar. uh, yeah, I think, well, this is prompted by this young black jaguar who I took photos of that guy at the Philadelphia Zoo years and years ago, and maybe about 10, 15 years ago did a small study. Um, and this is how these narrative works happen with me. Something just plants itself in my brain and it percolates, and I try to figure out what I'm going to do with it. It's the image of that young jaguar with his toy bucket. And I kind of, probably because of my knee issues, I thought that this was a painting about my lost youth. So I threw into the background here figures from art history. The figures on the left are from a Peter Bruegel painting, one of his seasons, the summer. So you have three women returning from the fields, young, bright-faced, full of life, young girl in the center. Then to her left, the one closest to us is a more grim adult, not so happy with the travails of her life and where it's leading. And the one on the right is an older woman with gray hair, head up high, striding purposefully and accepting of her fate in life. And I think that may be where I am right now and with my art. And in the other side, those figures are from Watteau, those young lovers from the embarkation to Cythera or the embarkation to Cythera. So sort of kind of like a lost, a past time in my life. And these are studies, obviously, of the jaguar, which, again, this was done not with any idea to frame and display it, but I did this just to determine what would the pose be and also how would I approach it. I mean, how do you paint black, for example? That's not such an easy thing to do. And the blacks really are not from a tube of black. They're mixed blacks, basically. Browns and oranges, or browns and blues, I should say, sometimes with viridian, sometimes with alizarin, and on different substrates, like an alizarin substrate here, a red violet there. And this is, toward evening, the larger version of the smaller one.
So is this something you saw like in the park?
Yes, actually up in Boston Common in the middle of the day. Yeah, I saw her and was able to reel off a couple of shots in different poses before she turned the corner with her dog. The dog wasn't really sleeping. It was, looking around at all the people and all the other dogs. But she was taking this obviously tired puppy home. So I decided to turn it into whatever this is.
And here are those watercolors again.
Yeah, looking down on the rocks in Jamestown, Rhode Island, near Newport.
And so you're painting these on the spot then?
Yes.
So will you keep it up, or have you switched back to oil now that you're mobile again?
I did enjoy it, so I'm going to have to fit it in more and more. The cat in the corner is watercolor and ink as well. So yeah, I'm not sure I'm like a pure watercolorist. A watercolor teacher I once had complained that I painted like an oil painter, but that's how it is.
Like it's a bad thing, right?
Right.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Tina.
So next we come to Stephanie Rogers' exhibition, but unfortunately, Stephanie can't be here with us this evening. So I'll read her statement and Tina will go through the show so you can just enjoy seeing the work. Stephanie writes, I fell in love with abstract painting 20 years ago after taking Casimamuti's class, Painting Over the Line. It was under his instruction that I learned, applying the principles of painting, to begin to trust my vision and exploring the power of a splat or a drip of paint. I love abstraction for its ability to free the viewer to make their own rich associations and discoveries. The eyes of man are but a mirror reflecting oneself in infinite design. Perhaps all paintings are self-portraits. I begin a painting with a gesture, then journey on contemplating composition, form, and color, a meditation of optimistic, colorful motion. I wish to impart the joy I feel surrendering to intuition and playfulness as it leads to the discovery of the finished piece. What develops remains open to the imagination, which I hope gives a reprieve from the harshness of this world. Right, and that's Stephanie's show. And next we come to Maria DiMauro. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Mike. Okay, so this show's a little bit different for me than prior shows because I'm working, there are 16 drawings in this show that are birds, and they are based on the photographs of Stephen Maciejewski. So I'm using someone else's imagery as the basis. I've been making art for like a little more than 25 years. I was trained as a painter. I've taught drawing where I went to undergrad at Arcadia University, and I also then studied for my graduate degree at PAFA. So anyway, I saw in October of 2020 during COVID, I saw an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer about a bird kill. And some of you may also have read the article where on one particular night, over 1,500 birds were found dead and strewn on the sidewalks within a 3-block radius of Center City, Philadelphia, because it was a perfect storm of conditions that night.
was a full moon. It was drizzling. There was a low cloud cover, and it was during prime peak migration periods for birds. There are always birds who collide with glass windows, but on this particular night, the environmental elements were extremely bad. So I was fascinated. I've always drawn birds' nests. I've done other drawings of birds, but birds don't. It's hard to draw birds because they don't stay still. And most drawings of them are paintings unless the bird is in a cage or chained, like the goldfinch, the famous goldfinch drawing. It's really hard to get an accurate image of what a bird is like. But Stephen's photographs I thought were really extraordinarily beautiful and gave me a subject that I could, he has hundreds, thousands of photographs. So there was so much material there. I do alter the photographs somewhat. Then the other subject matter are things that I continually return to, like nests and everyday household objects. I think so that's one thing that's a little bit different, is that I'm working from someone else's imagery, but I have a good working relationship with Stephen. And the second thing is I used it as an opportunity to explore metal point drawing. So I'm using silver point in a lot of these drawings. Some of them are graphite, like this is all a graphite drawing here, this nest. But I would say about half of the drawings in the show are mixed media metal point drawings, and I use silver. So I had done silver point drawings in the past, very long ago when I was first learning how to draw. But I decided I wanted to return to it and explore it because it's a way for me to be able to add color to the drawings. And so a lot of them were experiments in different grounds and different materials. This is definitely a mixed media drawing. This is, I'm also using acrylic gouache paints. So both as the under painting and then layering it on top of the drawings as well. This is, I do tend to draw mixed media. They look like they're just only graphite, but this has a lot of color pencil in it. The whole interior section is done with color pencil, and the outer part of it is graphite. This is a crow's nest that I sort of built. I examined lots of film and photographs of crow's nests and then built one myself based on how I knew they were structured. And the one thing I'll say about Stephen's photographs, I mean, I felt was so moved by them because I have drawn from specimens at the Academy of Natural Sciences. It's not quite the same thing. Like I much prefer to draw from life. So the nests I'm drawing from observing a nest. But the bird specimens at the Academy are pretty shriveled up and not very lifelike. So the photographs just give me a lot more information. I also have a lot of very kind friends who collect nests for me and donate them. That's all graphite. This is silver point and mixed media. There's acrylic gouache in this as well.
So Maria, do you usually work from photograph, or are you working from the thing itself?
No, I prefer to work from life, from the thing itself. But the bird drawings are from photograph because, as I said, you can't, I guess I could find a dead bird and work from it, but I take a long time to do the drawings. I think the bird would, I wouldn't finish the drawing before the bird would start to deteriorate. So the bird drawings are all from photographs.
How did you?
But the other drawings are all from life.
How did it feel to be doing from photograph? I mean,
it's, I wish I had the talent to be able to photographically copy a photograph, but I can't because I don't really think in terms of value. Everybody has a different way they think about form. And for me, I'm thinking very structurally. So when I work from a photograph, I'm sort of emitting the lights and the shadows and just feeling the form. and working into the photograph. Like I'm looking at the photograph, but it's not flat to me any longer. And I'm working in and out of the space of the photograph, and I'm actually feeling myself around the bird and kind of eliminating. I'll use light and shadow a little bit to advance or recede the form. But I'm actually kind of reaching in and touching, because this is basically how I was trained how to draw, reaching in and touching the form and sculpting it into the flat surface of the page. And Stephen has told me that a lot of people are really put off by the bird, the dead bird photographs, but I found them to be, I mean, I love them. These are just, I'm also like just to draw ordinary everyday objects. So they're usually drawn life size and from observation. I like lines, as you can probably imagine.
So is it a meditative process for you?
Yes, it's meditative. It's very slow. That's one of the reasons I love both graphite and silver point for their properties, because they require a lot of slow drawing. It is very, very meditative. Yeah, they take quite a long time to finish.
And you're donating proceeds of...
Yes, I'm going to donate a pretty good portion of the proceeds of the bird drawings to the American Bird Conservancy. And if anyone, I mean, there's a lot of information online. If any of you are interested in, researching bird collisions, there are over, I just found out the other day that it's estimated that there are close to 1 billion birds, 1 billion every year killed in the United States from collision with glass, and not just in tall high-rise glass buildings. In our homes, it's one-story buildings can be, probably more birds are killed in one-story buildings than in the high-rises. Just you get the large kills in the high on a bad night in a city on high-rises. The buildings that are built all of glass, and it's preventable. It's all preventable. The birds can't see glass the way we do, so they're attracted to light. There's one building in the city, the Comcast building, is particularly bad because it has a large atrium, if you're familiar with the building, inside, and there are trees inside the building. And the birds don't see the glass, and they come down to land on that tree, and they smash into the glass. They knew it when they built the building. They could have put glass. There's glass that has like little dots in it or patterns in it. That's very, very subtle, but that is visible to the birds, that buildings could be built with. And I think there are some cities, I think New York has just passed legislation where all new buildings will have to be built with this type of glass. I mean, I like to say I wasn't an altruistic thing, like I didn't make these because I wanted to bring attention to the problem necessarily. I made them because I love birds, and I love to draw birds, and it was an opportunity to have a lot of material to work with to draw the birds. But it's a nice outcome. And I also find them to be, the photographs and the subject matter to be sort of reminiscent of like a lot of religious iconography. So I find that really interesting too. I think probably a lot of these are portraits of things. I like portraits. I used to do a lot of head portraits. So with lack of models, I'm making portraits of gloves.
Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And next we have Bruce Garrity. Hello, Bruce.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. So, let's see. I've been painting for about 40 years. I went to the University of Delaware, where I studied with Larry Holmes, Stephen Tanis, and Robert Straight, who still, to me, show up in my work all the time. I guess I think of myself as a traditional painter, and basically as a is an early, I think of the tradition as being that early modernist sort of tradition, Matisse and Bonnard. Say I wrote their names down so I wouldn't forget them, like Ensor, Monk, people like that. At the same time, you know, when I was in undergraduate school, they were still talking about abstract expressionists, and you know, Richard Diebenkorn was like, you know, sort of the god of my time to a large degree, and he shows up in my work certainly. And of course, basically, Matisse died and Diebenkorn took over, to my way of thinking. In terms of subject matter, I do most of the traditional sorts of subject matter. I do figures, I do landscapes, I do still lives, interiors, things like that. Most of the interiors tend to be my studio. Most of the landscapes tend to be places I frequent in terms of, I don't know. Actually, I think of most of the landscapes that I do now, I would say, I think of as really sort of interiors. They tend to be woodland interiors, and oftentimes have like waterfalls and things like that in them. Which for me has to do with the fact that the elements are vertical. You know, you're up against a flat picture plane kind of thing. Wasn't always the case, but basically I would say that I'm an object painter as opposed to an atmosphere painter. Surface is important to me. I mean, to a large degree, I paint these away from the actual subject matter. Oftentimes the paintings are done from drawings. Occasionally I'll paint directly from a setup. Occasionally I'll paint from a photograph. But usually when I'm actually doing the painting, if the stuff is, assuming the stuff is even still set up, you know, I'll be painting in another room. I don't really paint from, you know, from observation per se. In other words, I don't look, oh, well, this part is this color and this part is that color. It tends to be more invented, although still not that far away from what I was looking at. But it tends to be from memory. And occasionally my memory fails me. Occasionally I'll go back and go, oh God, I painted that the wrong color altogether. Thinking I had painted it the right color, or what it was in real life. I think I think a lot about how we think about tradition when I'm painting. I mean, I don't know. Actually, when I'm painting, I don't think that much at all. It's usually when I'm staring at them, which is a good bit of the time that I spend on a painting. You know, students always ask me, well, how long did that take you to paint? And I'm always like, well, you know, the actual brush to canvas, not very long, you know, a day, maybe, you know, 12 hours altogether. But I probably stared at it, you know, for a month, 2 months, 3 months, you know, and it's really, the first part goes easily. You know, usually I paint from the beginning, it's very easy and it goes quickly. It's really the last 15% that's not really agonizing, but just takes a long time to decide, okay, it's done. And it's usually when I don't know, I don't think there's anything else that, I don't know what else to do to it. So in some ways, I think it must be done. You know, that being said, the whole idea of finish for me is pretty fluid. I mean, I've taken paintings home and, you know, I'll do a show. If the painting doesn't sell and I take it home, it's fair game to work on some more, you know, and it might show up in the next show is slightly different. I have a really large painting of, it's basically a takeoff on Cézanne's Large Bathers in the PMA. And I must have shown that in like 5 different iterations at this point. So, and I always find that interesting because, you know, it's not like it's completely painted, although actually that particular painting is painted over a completely different painting. So there's this whole history underneath of it.
So Bruce, do you like scrape down too and repaint, or is it just accumulative?
Occasionally I'll scrape out, but I don't very often, I have a lot of friends who talk about, oh, I paint and then I scrape it and then I paint
Sand
it
it,
again.
right?
I tend to just pile it on top. And sometimes it's very thin. I mean, if you look at a painting like this, a large part of the fabric
It's
and the
very thin
pattern is
wash.
the initial lay-in. It's somewhat thin or somewhat transparent, translucent. I mean, I'm really interested in those qualities of paint, from just the most ethereal sort of washes to being fairly thick. And people sometimes talk about, oh, well, it's really thick. Well, in a way, it's not really, but you're comparing it to some of this stuff that's very thin. So it has that feeling of being thick in places. And it is to a certain degree. The other thing that happens is that some of these are actually, they're not exactly copies. Like this is from a Matisse painting. It's not literally a copy. Usually what I do is I'll take a painting that I really like and I'll try to reset it up. So like Matisse didn't have any oranges in his particular painting, and largely the whole thing is rather dark. So the whole thing kind of lightened up in the case of mine. But I'm interested in that notion. I think of it like sort of an amateur musician, and I always think of it in terms of cover songs. When I was younger, I played in cover bands, so it was always like, how much of it do you try to play like the record, like the original, and how much of it do you try to make your own? So there's always that kind of play, and I find that really interesting. For me, those sort of traditional subject matters, I can't look at a painting of an apple and not think of Cezanne. I just can't. There's always that, and I'm always comparing things.
Do you
I
feel
was
that
reading
when
something
you,
the other day where a painter, somebody who I like, he said, "Oh, the worst thing somebody can do is compare you to somebody else." And I'm thinking, well, I don't know what other way we think of something. All of our thinking is really comparisons. Something we know to something, comparing it to something we maybe don't know that much about. I mean, other than that, there's just sort of pure experience, but I don't, there's only so much of that, when we're children and we haven't experienced things, but otherwise, our experiences are all, it seems to me, kind of relational and, referential. I can't think of the smell of bread without thinking of my mother, that sort of thing, So, you get all these interesting kinds of comparisons. Like this is not really based on any particular painting, but when I look at this, I think of James Ensor, who did a lot of shell paintings, or actually Steve Tanis had done a fair number of shell paintings. This sort of might have been, I don't know. There's always this. I think as a painter, that you're always playing around with these ideas of your heroes and people that you want to emulate. When you first start out, that's all you do is you try to emulate your heroes, right? And when you start to think about those things, all those comparisons are always, there's a bit of homage, there's a bit of a reproach. Oh, well, I would have done it differently, and part of it is just sort of jealous competition, right? So that's a big part of painting for me, is looking at other people and sort of working. It becomes kind of a conversation, I suppose, with other painters. And I'm a big fan of painting. I oftentimes talk to my students. I say, "Well, who do you look at?" And they go, "Oh, no, not really anybody." And I'm like, "Nah, you look at something, right?" It's like, how can you want to be a painter and not be a fan of painting? It's kind of, I don't know. For me, that's weird. I suppose there are people who don't want to be influenced, but that's sort of impossible. And it doesn't stop you from looking like somebody else just by accident, oftentimes. Let's see, what are we looking at now? Oh, so these are some heads, and I think of them as heads rather than as portraits. Um, they come from people, but oftentimes I'll take somebody's features and I'll overlay it with somebody else's who I think resembles them, and so that they become somewhat composites. What I'm really interested in is how, you know, the paint moves across the surface and emphasizes the features, what goes in, what goes out, how they sit against a background, those sorts of things. That's it. I don't know. I've tried, on occasion I'll actually make an actual portrait where it's meant to look like a particular person, and I don't know, usually it's by request of somebody, and you know, they're almost always disappointed with the nose or something. Like the classic you know, a portrait is a picture where there's something wrong with the nose.
So Bruce, you're offering a workshop with us on Saturday called Color Theory Meets Pigment Reality. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. So, you know, color theory is one of those things that you learn. I mean, you start to learn it in, I don't know, like I learned a little bit of it in kindergarten. Oh, you have 3 crayons. They're red, yellow, and blue. And if you want orange, you got to mix these 2 together, red and yellow together. But, you know, theory is one thing, and working with pigment, which are not necessarily primary pigments, is a whole different thing. You know, how do you mix color? So it's really, you know, to my way of thinking, it's probably 80% of painting is understanding how to mix color and being able to see distinctions of color. You know, how does light change color as it moves across the surface? You know, how does the color of the light affect the color of a thing? You know, there's no such thing. All color is relative. There's no such thing as true local color. You know, if we have a bright red object and it's in the room that we're looking at right now, it's one thing. If you turn the lights off, it's a completely different color now, right? So there's no such thing as only a color under certain lighting conditions. You know, which anybody, when Jeffrey paints outside, you know, he knows about changing lighting conditions, I'm sure. So, you know, that's the trick with trying to paint, you know, plein air is, you know, chasing the light, you know, how it changes. So, you know, there's a lot of things that you can learn to do. And it's actually, I think of color as being very conceptual. You think about color. Drawing, and I'm speaking in terms of drawing in the, you know, the sense of someone like Bonnard or somebody sort of like a free drawer as opposed to, you know, a point-to-point kind of drawing, you know, which is very intuitive, and you know, you follow the pencil around. So that's what we would talk about and do in the class.
Well, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
So are there any questions for Bruce or any of the other artists?
Bruce, Bruce, I love your the thick and thin. I love the thin parts too. The and where it looks like you're using marker or a thin something where you're drawing, and
yeah, they're actually like Sharpies. You know, I started using them, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, and really rather like them. And so that's probably the biggest difference between the kind of you know, the biggest change in the work is that line and color together kind of thing from what I was doing probably I guess, I don't know, 15 years ago, say 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Can I ask Maria, what is silver point?
Oh, you know, the pencil as we know it today is a fairly modern invention. So, I mean, graphite was only really discovered in the late 1500s. So really, they know from pretty ancient times people were drawing with metal styluses, either in wax or, you know, using lead to make a mark, and have been using metals like lead and zinc and silver points to make different kinds of writing on papyrus, etc. Although most of that has not survived. Silver point became kind of revitalized and popularized during the Renaissance. So a lot of those Renaissance drawings that you see in reproduction, you'll either see people drawing in ink, chalks, black and red chalks, which were things they could get from the earth and strap into a point and draw with, or a metal point. But in order to draw with metal, you have to prepare the paper. You know, you think about take your ring and you scratch it against a painted wall, you know, it makes a mark. So you prepare your ground, your paper, or board with some kind of paint. There's all different things you can use as a ground. You can use just plain gouache if you want. I use acrylic gouache. I tested like 6 different grounds to decide which I liked better. And then you get a piece of wire, and I have different sizes of wire, and you put it in a holder and you draw with it on the paper. It's not very erasable. You can erase a little bit. So you're just going to use like a lead holder, right? And you're going to put a piece of silver wire in it. And you can get like literally hundreds, you can hear my clock probably, hundreds of drawings from like one wire will last you a lifetime, which I think is so amazing. It's lighter than graphite. It's very, very light. It's not as dark, but it will tarnish over time, and it will turn darker like the same way silver tarnishes. But it has a different vibrational quality, I think, than graphite. It's very beautiful. It's very luminous. They each have their own particular luminosity, I think. It's really fun to draw with because it has this kind of life to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I should add that it basically was totally, once the pencil came, the pencils, they were using graphite like in the late 1500s, and then late 1800s, I think is when, or late 1700s, the pencil as we know it today was invented, and basically put silver point out of, you know, nobody's used it anymore. But then there was a revival when people got interested in Renaissance drawing. There was a revival of it, and even into the 20th century. And there are contemporary artists who are doing abstract work and working in metal points and doing some really interesting stuff with it.
Thank you. Great show.
Any other questions? All right, well, I guess we'll call it here. Thank you very much, artists, for your fine work. And thanks everyone for coming. And
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
the show's up to the 9th. So if you can see it, I also put a link in the chat. You can see everything is available on the website as well. And with that, hope you all have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Nice.
Ciao, Maria.
Ciao.